Jadeveon Clowney has been holding out, wants to be paid like an elite pass rusher. The Texans haven't seemed to be interested in doing that. Mike, we've heard a lot of conversation about could he end up in Miami? Would they just sort of make him wait through the year? Last week we were debating where he was going to end up. Well, we now know Clowney, the 26-year-old first overall pick in the 2014 draft, is headed to the Seahawks. The Texans will receive a 2020 third-round pick, defensive end Barkevious Mingo, also linebacker, and linebacker Jacob Martin, according to ESPN and multiple sources. So the Seahawks give up what feels like very little for somebody that is now going to sign his franchise tag. He'll play this year on that tag, and then we'll see what happens.
Gave up. I mean, listen, yeah, they got very little in return because in what position were they in to really bargain with people? We knew what Clowney had wielding because of that franchise tag and because of the amount of time they waited. Like, that's going to be the story with this is I understand and hear what everyone's saying in our rejoin that, all right, is Clowney necessarily the guy you're comfortable paying with Houston? No, but you needed to figure that out a long time ago. Like, you needed to figure that out well before you did, and you didn't in this situation. And so now you get basically pennies on the dollar back for this guy who's going to go, and instantly when we look at this from Seattle's perspective, it's amazing when a player that Houston might not be sure of all of a sudden goes to a team like the Seahawks. We look and say, oh yeah, this helps them a lot. They'll be one of the favorites in the NFC now.
I think it's fair to think about the diminished return in my mind because we knew this contract was coming. We knew this argument was coming. So the Texans must have believed at some point he would blink. That's the only thing I could think because it makes no sense to have not moved him before the draft otherwise. Like, that's where you would have been able to get the most equity in return for him. Moved him before the draft. Whoever trades for him gets him and then can also sign him to a long-term deal. It can all be done sort of at once. It becomes a very it becomes a much easier situation. This is so much different than the Khalil Mack situation because you're talking about where we are in the franchise tender that nothing else can be done. I mean, there was no leverage. You can't sign him long term right now. You can't do anything. Sources have said the Seahawks have assured they won't franchise him. So you're essentially renting a player for a year, and that's a much different situation than the Bears, who gave up a bounty for Khalil Mack, but then immediately announced a new deal for him.
And I say this is the other weird part about this. Mentioned Houston paid Clowney a $7 million signing bonus while Seattle's going to pay the remaining $8 million on his salary. So, like, Houston's still giving this guy money even on the way out the door in a situation where we look and it's hard to not evaluate this through the lens of, all right, well, Houston also, we remember, does not have a GM right now. So essentially you've got Bill O'Brien out here and whoever else they have in that collective calling the shots for a team without someone who's being mindful of their future.
Which could be another statement on why they're in this situation with their GM, because remember, it was a surprising move when they decided to part ways, and it was a surprising timing. So, you know, there has to be some moment where Bill O'Brien comes in and says, I'm sure the narrative on his end is easy to be, well, I'm just cleaning up messes that were left here for me, trying to make the best of what I have. But to your point, there isn't a clear GM strategy right now. So all we can look at it and say is, all right, Bill O'Brien's doing what he thinks is best, but the timing of it gives them no value in return.
They put themselves in a bad situation with this, and now Seattle's the beneficiary of this. Like Seattle, who let Frank Clark, go and ends up signing with the Kansas City Chiefs, adds a guy in that vein, an unbelievable athlete who they can use in multiple ways, who is one of the better run stuffers in the league, which is part of the complication with Clowney, 9.5 sacks being the most he's had in a season. It what gives you top pass rusher dollar. Like, we pay top defensive ends to rush the passer. All of these gaudy run stuffing numbers are great and beneficial to you in real life football, but they're not what gets you paid. That's not what makes you a market setter.
The best case scenario for Seattle, though, is they at least get to find out for a year I'm not saying for free because you have to pay a franchise tag. I understand that's money out the door, but it really is for free. They have so little leverage risk in this. I mean, ultimately what we'll remember of this trade significantly is essentially a third-round pick in 2020. And realistically, when you look at what the Texans have, what the Seahawks have left, they still have a boatload of picks next year. So there isn't a lot of consequence to the action of signing him. They bring him into the building. If they fall in love with him, then they could be comfortable giving him that mega deal. If they don't and they let him walk, to me, that's two teams then that would have had the opportunity to say, hey, I'll do whatever it takes to keep this guy, and two teams that haven't. Maybe that's a bigger statement. But, for the Seahawks, it feels like a no-lose situation.
Absolutely. We mentioned, so they're paying $8 million for this guy in this season. Like, all right, you could, for a guy who has been, again, maybe not top 5 pass rusher productive, but an absolutely lethal defensive piece, huge win for the Seahawks and what we know is going to be a crowded and competitive NFC, but especially now in that NFC West, big stock up for them. Big stock up.
And the NFC West particularly has pass rushers, right? Like as a division, they're able to get after the quarterback. This only helps even more in that. And I would also argue that you could look at some of the NFC West and say, hey, maybe if you got after the quarterbacks, it can change the level of success. Like we've accepted that Jared Goff is going to be incredible, but if you can get after Jared Goff, like that's your only shot, right?
That's what the Patriots did in the Super Bowl. Like you put the game on Jared Goff during that game, and you saw what the results were. A sloppy offensive performance really on both sides until late in the game, but an effective, and again, it's hard to say model because how many people can do what the Patriots do in any sense, but Seattle does have a top 5 caliber quarterback on their team. Seattle does have a defense that they've revamped and gotten younger with over the last couple of years. They bring Bobby Wagner back and ensure that core stays together on defense for the most part that they can build around now. This is a hell of a piece to add to the side.
Well, and like when we talk about the NFC West, 49ers have done the same thing. They've tried to address pass rush as best that they can through the draft and free agency. They hope that Jimmy G turns out to be better than Jimmy G has been. But for the Seahawks, I think these are the sorts of moments that this is your best way if you're a team right before the season and you're trying to take a leap forward of some sort. This move makes the most sense in that sense. It does take the Seahawks to another level forward, and it does take a layer away from the Texans defensively, which I think will have some consequence as well because J.J. Watt was spectacular last year. I'm not taking anything away from that, but you don't lose 9.5 sacks and just suddenly replace it. I'm not gonna buy into the Jadeveon Clowney doesn't really matter to what the Texans defense is going to do this year.
It just, and you know what, J.J. Watt is a generational defensive player in his own right, so maybe he continues to overcome, but he's a guy who has been banged up, like Rob Gronkowski levels of banged up, and we saw what that did to his career.
Thanks so much for watching ESPN on YouTube. For more sports analysis and highlights, download the ESPN app. And for live streaming and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.